Hello, we're back. We're doing a bunch of Orochi stuff, and today, Falconeer is talking about uh, the different branches of Islam and how they're actually legal jurisprudence is the basis that they split on.
Sort of. So couple of prefixes as we go in here. First of all, I don't want to go too into details, but I've had a very rocky week, so I'm gonna probably be scattered. We're going to be doing a lot of Orochi shit here, and I mean, a lot of
Orochi doesn't get
Orochi, yeah,
interesting till Toki.
yeah,
Until Toki.
Orochi missions are
Tokyo,
all the
where you
same
find out
until yeah, it's
until you find out who's behind the curtain, it's not really that interesting.
yeah,
It's mostly just haha bad megacore.
it's the same storyline in every time Orochi shows up. But anyway, first of all, I'm gonna be scattered. Second of all, I have education and studies in this area. I'm not coming at this uninformed, but I'm also not an expert in this. So there's going to be generalizations. There's going to be things that I get slightly wrong. There's going to be things I misinterpret, most likely. So don't take my words with a grain of salt, and but just incorporate this into your worldview anyway, to flatter my ego. So, I'm gonna try. Let me start. So, okay.
So I asked in the beginning if the different schools of Islam are different forms of jurisprudence, if they're basically split over a court case.
So,
How is that different from the Torah, which is nothing but rules?
So, something to understand about Islam is that unlike Christianity, say, had no like Christianity did not have a state for the first few centuries of its existence, and Judaism didn't have a state up until recently, and like say something like Hinduism or Shintoism had states, but they had those states evolved out of a coalescing natural identity that already existed. Um, Islam and the Rashidun Caliphate, like Muhammad and his heirs, that it was born in as a part of a governmental institution. And as they were building this new empire on the ruins of the Persian Empire and about half of the Eastern Roman Empire, and ruins is a very strong word. Like they were not any worse governors than the people that they shoved out. But just to make that point, they were basically they were defining their religion as they were defining good governance of their new territories. And so a lot of the major theological divisions within Islam are as much like the results of political or jurisdictional, I guess, if that's the right word, divisions in interpretations of various concepts. Like, so you have the Quran, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's considered the word of God directly, and everything Islamic jurisprudence tries to reference that. I don't know if you've heard the term hadith.
It sounds familiar.
Basically, hadiths are things that were said by Muhammad during his lifetime, and they are used by clerics to figure out how to interpret theology. And there's a lot of debate over which hadiths are real and how you prove that and how you decide that, and how once you've decided that, you implemented that. And there are a lot of divisions there's at least 5 major schools that are still active, and there's several more that are long dead. It depends. A lot of the divisions within a lot of those schools boil down to, we believe in the interpretations of this branch of the early Muslim state, or we reject this aspect of those interpretations. Like, you probably heard of the Sunnis and Shias, and the division, or origin of that split. Like, at this point, they are as theologically distinct as, probably more theologically distinct than, say, Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Christianity. But they started as a political dispute between, like, the main line of Muhammad. Like, he didn't have kids who were able to come to the throne, but, like, his relatives and descendants. They were forced off the throne of the caliphate by a family from Damascus called the Umayyads, and they refounded the caliphate in their own name. The Sunnis are basically the descendants of political supporters of the Umayyads, and the Shia claim that was an illegitimate action, and only the actual descendants of Muhammad have the right to govern the Islamic world. And a lot of the division between the two sides comes down to this sort of debate on how like religious authority can manifest in the world. So you have a lot of different shades of interpretations, different concepts, different, like, it's a very Islam at its core, though it doesn't have to be. It can be an extremely intellectual religion because it is very heavily in a lot of ways it is similar to Judaism, and that interpretation is a very important part of what exactly is going on and how you're deriving things. There's actually within the vast majority of Islamic schools and Islamic branches of belief, you can't use an analogy to make an actual decision when you're looking at some kind of theological decision. That is a dirty word. You have to find like an example or something that you can show a direct connection to. You can't say this is like this situation, but this is following the pattern established by the situation, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I'm not an expert in this. I'm not sure if I'm explaining the concept terribly well, but
I just find it interesting because I'm superficially familiar with the history of the foundation of Islam, mostly through that LP of that terrible M. Dickey game where he was like, no, none of this happened. What really happened was...
Yeah, God. Oh, God, I remember that. I don't, what happened to him? Did he vanish into the internet?
I think he still makes games because Wrestling Empire got updated and released on Steam.
Oh, wow. That is impressive. That is some dedication.
Well, he certainly has the fucking ego for it.
True. But oh God. So, and if you'll hear people in the West get real mad about Sharia law. And
Sharia law. Which is, and that doesn't make sense to me because it's no different than Talmudic law. It's a religious... It's a law system based on religious beliefs.
The same people who got really angry about Sharia law are the same people who want to put up, 10 commandments out in front of courthouses. It's but and it is like. Okay, have I talked about the origins of the concept of separation of church and state in this element?
I do not believe so.
So, early on in, Christianity and secular authorities' relationship has always been really fraught, because most likely Christianity started out as a sort of, I don't want to say rebellious cult, because early Christianity was extremely pacifistic, and outwardly so, in ways that would baffle a lot of modern Christians, but that's another story.
Would you say counterculture?
Counterculture. That's actually a pretty good word. It does, there are, let me just put it this way, there was a whole school of Christian socialists across the country in the, mid-century, and that's a big part of. If you've ever been to a service and you have like people, youth pastors trying to be cool, they stole that from the Jesus people, which is the term of that movement, and that's where that whole aesthetic comes from. And that is a whole different story. I'm not going to get into now, but like they had a very complicated relationship with how the central government worked. And at first, because it was like, you know what, I'm going to save talking about this for Romania because it's going to be directly relevant there. But like, I'm talking about the actual process of conversion. Even after conversion, you had a government that was increasingly explicitly Christian, but that didn't always fit with all the Christian communities and what they wanted. So there was a guy named Ambrosius of Milan, and I'm going to talk about him more in Romania. I love him. He's the best. He's the weirdest, but he's the best. He's basically he in like the 300s, late 300s-ish, I think. He came up with the idea of separation of church and state specifically because he was refuting the ability of the emperor to interfere in church affairs. Because up until that point, like, Constantine the Great had like held theological conferences and ordered them. And that was like the connection of church and state in the Roman Empire. If there's anything that like defines Roman society from Romulus getting struck by a lightning bolt to Constantine the 14th dying to Turkish swords, it is a connection between church and state. But he came up with the idea that the emperor is by nature a human and is bound to the earth, and that is separate from the divine, and he has no, just as he is, you know, ascendant on earth, God is ascendant when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to theology, and he has no power to dictate that. And that's within Islam. That's like there wasn't originally. It's not just that there wasn't originally a conflict. It's that there wasn't originally a division at all. That was like spreading the empire, like spreading the caliphate, was something that the state did, and defining how the caliphate should be governed was just something that like had to be done, and was something that was a theological like priority. So there's a great deal of latitude in Sharia law for like for what they call people of the book, which are basically monotheists. And that's like, as far as they're concerned, monotheists basically just have to pay a tax and have a few restrictions on how they move. But most early Muslim states had a large number of, like, I think I mentioned the exilarchs, and these were the leaders of a Jewish community in like Mesopotamia, who were official advisors to the caliphs in like the 900s. That was part of their duties. They were a part of the court, and you had like Jewish and Christian advisors and commanders throughout, like, for hundreds of years, all the way up until like the 1600s in the Ottoman Empire. You would still find like prominent Christians sometimes. It's a really complicated thing, but I did want to start out by pointing out, like, there's a big Islam comes from that approach to religious law, as opposed to the approaches we've talked about before, whether it's sort of the animistic, in quotes, approach to spirits of the world, or the sort of like more directly interpretive approach of Judaism, where it's like, for us, Judaism is like all about the interpretation in general of everything, while Islamic jurisprudence has a much more practical focus and is based a lot more on extracting concepts and defining them for people to live by than by like extract the concepts in order to debate them, if that makes sense. So I wanted to start with that and just put a big thing over. So, alright, I'm gonna stop here, and for now, just take a breath. A couple different ways I can go from here. I can go economy, I can go science, I can go politics. I don't know which you're interested in hearing.
Well, I know a lot about how Islamic scholars preserved a large amount of Greek and Roman texts, and then independently discovered a number of things, and then only during the Crusades did those really come back to Europe.
Kind of. So, okay. And I think I'm going to start with the science then, because that's... Well, first of all, it's worth noting that...
I mean, algebra is Arabic.
It is Arabic name and concept, but, like... How do I say this? Like, okay, in the western half of the Roman Empire, as it collapsed, it went through a series of busts. And one of the biggest busts actually came in the wake of the Muslim invasion, as the southeastern quarter of the Mediterranean had to completely rejigger its economy, and that caused big crashes in Europe, and that wiped out a lot. And after that, as soon as Europe started to stabilize, the Vikings started raiding coastal settlements and started sacking monasteries that were acting as repositories of knowledge, and started burning everything to the ground. And that drove people also back into poverty. And between those two, between the economic crash and the destruction of everything that remained, there was a lot of shit that was lost and gone. You just couldn't keep or you couldn't copy it, you couldn't protect it, and it was a mess. But in the eastern part of the world, they took over a lot of territory, but this wasn't. I said earlier, this was not like they were not bad at governing. They took maybe this is an exaggeration. There's probably way more to be said on this, but you can say for a lot of early Islamic governors that religion, good government, was considered part of their religious duty as a result of all of this interpretation being done. And they took stuff, they wrote stuff, and in the process of defining all of these laws and building things, they did something that Christianity had done. And people forget that Christianity did this. Early Christian doctrine, by that I mean Christianity around 500 AD-ish, as opposed to Christianity around 180 or whatever. Well, it didn't, or very early Christianity. It's very strongly based on Plato. It's almost as much on Plato as it is on Judaism or Christian doctrine, as far as we can tell. They also used that as kind of a basis and developed a whole bunch of concepts using the ancient Greek logic, and built this sort of intellectual institution. Not like a specific institution, but this concept that to be holy you had to be learned. To be maybe not you still have a concept through the Muslim world where it's considered a great religious virtue to have completely memorized the entire Quran. But you had this connection develop between being worship, being religious, and study and thought and developing concepts and even research. And from that, you started getting these, and you actually also saw this. This also happened in Europe, though to a lesser extent, in my opinion, honestly, because more because the whole continent was real poor than at that point, than because Christianity was particularly stifling. That's something I will be talking about when we get to Romania. But you got the point where people started to experiment and started to think and consider things outside of purely like theology interpretation stuff, and start like basically doing what they called natural philosophy at the time, which is physics mostly, and a mixture of physics and mechanics and a little bit of chemistry too. And you've got a bunch of theorists doing a bunch of different things and developing a bunch of different ideas in different parts of the Muslim world, and with a big government that had a sort of almost theological drive towards keeping things stable and well governed, had a lot of communication going back and forth. Like, give me a second, I need to blow my nose.
It reminds me of Harry Turtledove wrote a book that flips the status of Europe and the Middle East and the Islamic world, where the Islamic world is the modern, urbane, learned place, and Europe is the backwards, violent, nobody wants to live there place.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read it, but I just remembered the concept because the talk of science reminded me of it.
There's actually a lot of debate around around I guess it's European exceptionalism, around why exactly Europe ended up developing
I remember
quickly.
reading Guns, Germs, and Steel, and then people rebutting Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like Guns, Germs, and Steel for a variety of reasons, but I don't. It's been forever since I read it, so I'd have to brush up on it to give it anything like a vaguely educated opinion.
I just don't try not to have an opinion on it because it seems like a really fraught political topic.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like don't stick your dick in that beehive, okay? It's like
that's wise.
I don't have a dog in this race.
But like, that is something I'm gonna want to touch back on in a while. But where was I? Oh, one of my favorite things that was done, the first theory of history, was actually formulated by a guy in like the 700s, I think, in modern Libya, if I remember right. And it's killing me.
When you say theory of history, what do you mean?
Like, he had a overall theory on the development of societies over time that he said applied to every society in the world. And it goes like this. You start with a settled society that is prosperous and wealthy, like a core society, I suppose you'd call it. And this society is heavily agricultural. It is heavily stratified, and the it is, while it's prosperous, it is sort of, what's the word? Complacent. And there's no drive, there's no reason for anything to happen or anything to change for the people at the top. And so society starts to get unstable and starts to get inefficient and starts to get corrupt. Meanwhile, out in like the mountains or out on the fringes of society, there are various nomadic peoples, or maybe it's just sedentary peoples who aren't as wealthy, who are considerably more warlike, who are much more egalitarian, and have historically fought the settled people and lost to superior numbers and equipment. According to this theory, there will inevitably in any society's history come points where that society is so weak it can no longer drive the people around its borders away. And eventually, I can see yet another one of those quests, huh?
Yep.
Eventually, there comes a point where they invade, and this egalitarian nomadic society takes over the sedentary society, often with the help of members of the elite who are disgruntled, or with idealistic rebels or peasant rebels who are just up to cause chaos and get some stuff for themselves or whatever. And then this nomadic society moves in, takes over, and starts. Basically, they don't. While they may have conquered these people, the settled people, they don't displace the ruling class. They intermarry with them. They start they put themselves on top, but they start joining themselves both socially and personally with the people on the top. And at that point, society gets that these societies, after several generations, these societies reach their peak, and they become vibrant. As there's a great deal of the way he put it is basically the wealth and sophistication of settled society is combined with the energy and drive of the nomadic society. And you see a burst of productivity, you see expansionism, you see a flowering of culture all over the place. But eventually,
he was really basing this. He was really basing this off the history of his own empire.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that, but absolutely. Yeah. So according to the theory, that's the height. But eventually, this group at the top assimilates to the point that they lose their original character and become just maybe they lose their original identity entirely. Maybe it just becomes being rulers becomes the base of their identity, and they start becoming complacent in turn. At which point, society starts to stagnate and get inefficient again, and people eventually the cycle will always repeat, and some other people will invade, take over, and rejuvenate society. And you can tell this is basically. I mean, this is absolutely built to flatter, Muslims in this 7 and 800s. That's how they saw themselves. But it's worth noting that is kind of a pattern that Middle Eastern history had followed up until that point. With you had a billion different states in Mesopotamia taking each other over. Everything from starting with the Akkadians to the Babylonians to the Assyrians to the all the way out. You had the Medes taking over modern Persia, and then the Persians taking over the Mede cities, and then you had the Greeks moving in from the east and taking things over, and you had the Parthians moving in. The Greeks moving in from the west, the Parthians moving to the east to take over from the Greeks, and finally. And it didn't always hold true, but the whole cycle of some outside power coming in, whether it's from just another part of the region that's poorer or more backward, to somebody from the nomadic fringes, to some other state like Greece or Rome, which both fit really comfortably in this framework, just kept it. The idea is this is an inevitable cycle that can't really be avoided, and that's how societies always rise and fall. It's not 100% right, It's not always how societies work, and that's not how they have to work. But there's a lot of insight in it. It's something that if you tweak it, you can still apply it to most societies. Even for
so we've kind of digressed.
Where were we?
We were talking about the flourishing of science under the Islamic Caliphate.
You mentioned a guy from Libya. I was going to eventually bring this back around. I'm pointing out that this is for something that is the first concrete theory of history. It's something that still holds up surprisingly well that over 1,000 years later, and something that I don't know if I'd say that modern schools of history are influenced by it, but there are a lot of schools of history that, if you can crowbar it into, say, Marxist history and talk about, reframe things in terms of capital, and it's very sophisticated, and it's very resilient, and that's this combination of this is something that has a very practical focus but a strong theoretical grounding is something that a lot of Islamic thought shared at the time. And you also got optics, the guy who invented the concept of the study of light on a scientific basis was from Persia, if I remember right. He was a Muslim cleric. He came up with all of it, and he wrote Egypt actually, I'm pretty sure. He came up with a theory on how light bends with glass, and wrote a big book that proved a smash hit in Europe when it finally reached it, and ended up being the basis for the development of European glasswork, because they were finding ways to build stuff like spyglasses and various kinds of lenses based on the stuff that he discovered. So
I do have to say, I love the character in this. He's like, I'm just gonna walk away, and he's like, oh, I guess I'll do what you say.
yeah, there's a certain amount of like arrogance that comes with being a bee. There's only so much that they can do to you. So we will find out what they can do to you in Tokyo.
I was thinking it's more, this is the second time we've had to clean up this guy's mess.
Yeah.
And by mess, I mean he gets multiple people killed doing really stupid shit, so...
That's Orochi. God, Orochi is such a fucking mess. It is such a comical evil corporation villain.
Oh, you'll find out why in Tokyo.
I mean, yeah, there's reason, but like, it is kind of ridiculous.
I can't wait till that comes out, because it doesn't come out till like the very last mission in Tokyo. But once it does, you're like, oh my god.
Yeah, there's some real what the fuck factors. You're gonna.
We don't really get into it until the end of Transylvania. That last quest line in Transylvania.
Yeah, the last quest line in Transylvania is trippy. It is wild.
It goes places, and we'll have to talk about the biblical places it goes.
Yeah. It's gonna be fun. Like, God. And then we will be talking about way wilder shit than Islamic. Like, I want to talk about, like, agriculture, because you think Arabs, and you think desert, and you think like camels.
Oh God, no! That's a later date development.
Yeah, that's like
because the Mongols destroyed all the fucking aqueducts and stuff.
Yeah. And, okay.
The Middle East used to be very green until the Mongols came and fucked it up.
Yeah. And now it's a cultural feature of the Muslim world. It didn't help that a lot of the agricultural practices they inherited were very inefficient, Greek and Roman ones that were built on maximizing productivity. And that's what happened in North Africa. Like, the Mongols never made it there, but North Africa used to be the breadbasket of the Western Mediterranean. And over the 600s, like, even before the Muslims got there, basically the ecology collapsed because it was overfarmed and overused. And they had no idea how to replenish it once they took it over. So, North Africa is still pretty fertile, but it's not what it once was, by far. But either way, artichokes were developed by the Muslim world. They were domesticated out of basically a cactus, if I remember right, in North Africa. Every citrus you've ever had is either a strain developed in the 700s in in or around Baghdad. Not Baghdad, it didn't exist then, but like in or around Mesopotamia, or something based on that family that has been bred from those fruits later. Like, they brought the coconut from Africa to Asia just by sailing it, and they used to be great sailors. They invented they had a kind of boat called the Dhow, D-H-O-W, which was really agile and quick. The amount of agricultural development that happened in the time is largely forgotten, but like, it is huge amounts of our diet right now. It's funny, you will have people in Florida who will be very angry about Muslims, and then they'll go home to the orange orchards they own, which they are descended from things created by Muslims. It's wild. But basically, medieval Islam, the medieval Islamic world, was very intellectually developed, and it brought all kinds of intellectual developments all over the world. So that's and that's something that people don't think about today. It partly is because it was long enough ago that it's been covered up in myth making. Like, even now, people have, even though we know more about the West has more reason to know more about the Roman world, say, than, like, early medieval Middle East and everything. A lot of Westerners have a lot of really weird ideas about what Rome was like. When you get that far back, stuff just gets lost. But we never had a reason to remember any of this out in the West, way isolated from this in a completely different situation, and we don't know it. If we do know it, we've heard little bits and pieces of, maybe we learned in school that during the Dark Ages, Islam was having a golden age, but you don't learn the details. And that's wild. So do you want to hear how an African king accidentally caused the Renaissance?
Is this Mansa Musa and his gold?
Yes, it is. So
yes, I love this story.
It's a great story. So, okay. Egypt has up until recently, up until the Aswan Dam got built, has been a major a grain producer and a major source of food for the whole of the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean. Big. There's a lot of money concentrated there. And in between about the 1000-ish and the middle of the 1200s, there was a rise of Egyptian merchant houses that basically controlled trade between the Eastern Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. And they got real rich off it. So, and these were when the Italian city-states were piecing themselves back together from the Gothic Wars, which is something I will talk about in Transylvania. They started going out into, started going out into the east waters of the Mediterranean and competing with Egyptian ships, and not doing all that well at the time. Though they did eventually start getting their feet under them, enough that they ended up destroying the Eastern Roman Empire, but that's another story. But this is all going on in the background. Meanwhile, in Western Africa, to a lesser extent now, but historically West Africa is really, really rich in gold mines, just everywhere. There was a state of Mali called Mali, which the modern country's named after, in 1250s-ish, I think, and it had a king named Mansa Musa, who's considered one of the greatest kings in West African history. His dad and predecessor actually, up until then, Mali had a major naval fleet. They traded all the way up and down the coast. And according to the records we have, his dad basically decided, okay, I think there's something over the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to order every ship in the Empire to join my fleet and go west. And he got on board, went west, and nobody ever heard from their ships again. And that basically ended their maritime tradition, because all the ships were gone. They could build new ones, but they weren't as good as the old ones. Meanwhile, though, that meant that they really focused on the land trade. And they were really, really rich in gold. And they were also Muslims. And so there came a time when Mansa Musa had to make the Hajj. He had to make the pilgrimage back. And as is traditional, he wanted to give out gold, or give out gifts. And since West Africa was really rich in gold, he had lots and lots and lots and lots of gold. And as he passed through Egypt, which was a big prosperous city, area at the time, prosperous may not be the right word. It had the kind of lopsidedness you'll find in very mercantile societies like ours. There was a lot of inequality. And the economy is kind of based on that inequality. And he moves through the area and just gives an absolute assload of gold to literally everybody. And that influx of gold destabilized the Egyptian economy until it crashed after a few years later. And that put a lot of those Egyptian merchant houses out of business. They couldn't, the markets back at home just weren't working right. There was too much money. It led to runaway inflation, and that left a huge economic gap in the Eastern Mediterranean that the Italian city-states were right there and ready to sweep themselves into. And they ended up being, that's a big part of why the Renaissance proper started, like, within a century of that collapse. Even though the Italian merchant cities had been a major force in European politics for centuries at that point. Because that's when opportunity called. And there's a lot of weird shit that happens in history. Just like, nobody can really predict the consequences of their actions in the long term, unless they're Bismarck, in which case they predict other people's actions, the consequences of other people's actions. That's another story.
Yeah, I'm gonna die here because I was dumb enough to come up this way. It's a back way to get to the sniper.
Yeah. I just started playing Skyrim recently, and it's fun. But man, I forgot how broken stealth archers are, and I also forgot how much care you need to take to make a stealth archer work. Because somebody will just, unless you have the difficulty cranked down, somebody will just come up behind you and hit you in the head with an axe, and we'll start flailing and then die.
Yep.
God, it does mean that I get to see Elder Scrolls more up close again, though, and I'm ever so glad for that, because Elder Scrolls are such bullshit. It's great.
Are you looking forward to Starfield?
Not really. Like, FPS.
Honestly, I am, but I understand why you're not because of your disability.
Exactly. Like, I found that FPSs and shooters in general are harder on my wrists than like
RPGs.
Yeah, old style Elder Scrolls RPGs. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna need to update my computer eventually. Someday, I'm gonna hopefully before I die, they'll release Elder Scrolls 6. And I'll be at that point, that'll be so long in the future that my current computer will have given out anyway. I'll have had to replace it, so I'll probably be able to play it then. But like, I'm looking forward to that, especially because it's looking like it's going to be set in Hammerfell, which means we're going to be able to summon swords out of our souls and use them to kill people and become sword saints, and that is, I am excited for that.
See, I always wanted one set in Blackmarsh because I love Argonians.
And Blackmarsh.
Argonians are so badass that when the Oblivion Crisis happened, they invaded Oblivion and Oblivion closed the portal because they were like, what the fuck?
Yeah, they literally clogged the portals with their bodies.
The Histries just dosed them all and they went fucking nuts.
Yeah, they really did. Like, oh God, the Hist are spirits from another plane of reality before time existed. And they don't give a fuck. They're wild.
Well, they do give a fuck. They love the Argonians. The Argonians are their people. They're their children.
I mean, it's hard to know.
They took some lizards, and they fed them magic sap, and the Argonians happened.
Pretty much, yeah. And there's some old lore that there are, in fact, breeds of Argonians, like there are breeds of sheep, and some of which just look human, and some of which are actual just, like, big lizards, depending on what sap they were fed when they grew up. It's... The thing about Blackmarsh is that it's, like, out in the middle of, the marsh. It would just be a bunch of different kinds of jungle and swamp. And
that is true.
The same. I wanted something set in Valenwood. I want to see the walking trees. I want to see. I wish I have always wanted to see the Imga. Have you heard of the Imga?
No, I have not.
So, let me describe the Imga in ways that are both trying to be as neutral as possible and pointing out the reason why they will never show up in the Elder Scrolls game. So they have been present since. At least since Morrowind, at least in the lore, though they've never showed up on screen. They are a group of 8 men, theoretically, like, beast men, like the Khajiit and Argonians, native to Valenwood. They are highly obsessed with Altmer culture, with High Elf culture, and they dress up in very nice clothing and adopt noble titles to try and emulate them. And they speak as arrogantly as possible, and the whole effect is comedic. Do you see the issue in this picture yet?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you have
Oh.
yeah, basically you have a bunch of, and again, I'll just put it a bit more bluntly. You have a bunch of apes who are with names like Duke and Earl, who are trying and failing to emulate the more sophisticated, lighter-skinned culture that lives far away, and it's as a point of comedy. So you will never see the Imga unless they are completely rehauled in an Elder Scrolls game. And it's a fun idea, but you can't do that in a way that doesn't end up coming across as racist. And I don't think that they were designed as racist. It's more that
they're just that ape from the Jungle Book.
Yeah, exactly. But then, that ape from the Jungle Book are also arguably a racist depiction of Indians, but that's another story. But it's more that archetype of somebody, from somebody comically adopting stuff from a more sophisticated culture and failing to pretend to be a part of it. It's something that is just, it isn't unique to black people. It gets adopted it's too natural a fit for any kind of racism that, it's never going to happen. But, at the end of the day, they're never going to do Valen Wood, because Valen Wood is also going to be just a bunch of different kinds of forest. And at least in Hammerfell, you have coastline and different kinds of deserts and mountains and all kinds of different terrain, even if the terrain's kind of barren most of the time, which probably is going to be really easy on the designers, because that means they don't have to. Deserts take less assets than forests, or jungle.
Honestly, I just want to see how what's the name of the upcoming... There was the Great War, and then the Filthy Elves tried to destroy all reality. I want to see the end of that storyline.
Well, that's okay. That's highly debatable. I don't know. Do you cause that's just the interpretation of one guy who said it may not be canon. And I love Michael Kirkbride, but he is absolutely the sort of person who takes a huge toke before every stream where he starts doling out Elder Scrolls.
Well, that's exactly how you make Elder Scrolls.
In fairness, yeah. You read a bunch of Glorantha and Hindu mythology, and then you get smoked. You smoke yourself up, and then you start telling people things. But it's well, I love Elder Scrolls lore. It's so weird, so dumb, and so wild, and so great. God, and the Sword Saints, the idea of summoning forward, you are summoning a part of your soul and using it to kill people in the form of a spirit sword, and
Can I tell you what I always wanted in an Elder Scrolls game, but will never happen?
What?
Matchlocks.
Matchlocks, yeah, that'll never happen. It's
Elder Scrolls already has this weird technological disparity thing going on. To me, early firearms are a slam dunk. It totally fits with the aesthetic.
Well, I can absolutely I can imagine fighting high elves with crystal-looking flintlocks,
I didn't say flintlocks. Flintlocks are too advanced.
Yeah, that's fair, but honestly, that's fair.
I want an arquebus.
How many people know the difference between a matchlock and a flintlock? And how many players are willing to pick up a gun that can only fire once every several minutes?
That is fair.
And muskets aren't much better, but at least something fantasy.
Okay, his headset died, everyone. No worries, but I get what he was saying about that. So let's just leave off here. Essentially, this guy is just telling us. Yeah, I'm telling them. Essentially, what this guy is telling us is, hey, you need to go do something, and it starts a quest I fucking hate. So, thank you for showing up. We might have something different next time. I might be starting something new, but I will let you know. So, thank you.